Hi, I'm Sean.
I'm Rhonda.
Sometimes when you want to bring up an issue to your spouse and it doesn't go well, you may not have brought it up at a good time for them.
It's really important to not bring up an issue when somebody's about to go out the door to work or when they're in the middle of a project or something because they're just not going to have the focus for it. And you really, when you talk through a challenging issue, you really want your spouse to be able to engage and give it their full attention.
You might need to ask when would be a good time that we could talk about this issue that I have.
And so once you set up a day and a time that your spouse agrees on, and we ask, if your spouse has something important to say, it would be good if you could agree on sometime soon instead of,
yeah.
what about next week on Tuesday at 3 o'clock? And that's not prioritizing the relationship. We're talking more like, what about this evening after I get in from work? Maybe we can talk then. Would that work for you?
We really want to show value for the issue that our spouse has. Obviously, it may not be an issue to you, but just because it's not important or an issue to you doesn't mean it's not important to them.
And so if your spouse is reluctant, you want to explore why and see if you can resolve that.
We may need to reassure them that we want to be closer to them and we want to do what they're asking.
You don't want to force a topic if your spouse isn't ready. If you have a history of exploding and they know that if we start this discussion, it's going to turn into a 1, 2, 3 hour verbal jousting match, they're probably not going to want to. So you kind of have to change your history. You have to limit words, emotions, and intensity. You need to speak slowly and allow pauses for your internal processor to think things through. But you have to change the expectations if you have set that up in the past. And you might have to reassure your spouse, just give us 10 minutes. Let's set the timer. And that would allow us time for me to say, and then for you to hear it, and then for us to talk about it. But that's all we're going to do, depending on where you are, and make sure it's a dialogue and not a monologue.
If there's a lot of conflict in your relationship and you can't discuss an issue, you might be able to write it down. We've definitely dealt with couples that had such a difficult time verbalizing something that it really came across better to their spouse if they wrote it down and then their spouse could read it.
It gets all the nonverbals out of the picture. It gets the facial expression, tone of voice, body language. It lets you think through your choice of words. It lets you limit your words. And then it allows your spouse to read it when they feel ready. And then your spouse can also journal a response. This can be extremely helpful when couples just can't seem to communicate.
We want to make sure that our spouse feels safe when we bring up an issue. So what makes you feel threatened or like you can't trust me in this situation when I'm bringing up an issue? And we want to address that. We want to make changes so that our spouse feels safe to be able to hear our issue.
You also want to be approachable, both parties, to where I could tell you if there was something in the environment that didn't make me feel safe with you.
Some of these things just seem obvious when you talk about them, that we should be approachable to our spouse. But I think we have to talk about it because sometimes we do things that makes our spouse feel like they can't come to us when there's an issue, and we don't want that.
Right.
You can't be close when you feel like you can't bring up an issue to your spouse when you have one.
I like James 3:17 through 18. The wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. That's loaded. It would be great to study that because there's a lot in that about safe environment.
Easy to be entreated. Does my spouse feel like I'm easy to be entreated? It's easy to come to you. When I have an issue, you're easy to talk to. You're approachable.
Yeah. Gentle.
Wow.
A lot of people don't come across as gentle. They're too firm. Their tone has an edge. Full of mercy, full of good fruits. if this is oozing from us and our spirit, our spouse is partaking of the fruit of the Spirit instead of the fruit of the flesh, instead of carnality, then we're more likely to feel approachable and for it to feel like it's a safe environment.
And God is showing himself to be the example of this, because he said it's the wisdom that comes from above. It's wisdom that comes from him. So he obviously is going to be acting that way toward us. God is easy to be entreated. I mean, look at how many times Jesus said, ask what you will and it'll be done to you. He's making himself open to serve us.
And a spouse is more likely to want to know what you think if you've convinced them you care about what they think. So think back. Have there been problems your spouse has brought up to you and you didn't listen? You didn't hear them? You flipped the topic and now it's all about me? Because let's face it, there's a counterpart, a flip side of the coin to every topic, most likely. So for example, we talked about the male tone of voice a few times. So let's say that the man has a firm tone or tone that feels harsh to the female ears. Guess what? He may want to address what provoked him to use that firm or harsh tone. Could have been her sassy tone, right? Could have been something provocative she laid on the table. And this could go on and on.
Sometimes we can have issues that never get resolved, and that can be discouraging to the spouse that it's an issue too.
Yeah.
And when they feel like there's starting to be a backlog of, I wanted this and now they won't do that, and I need this but they won't do anything about it, that can be discouraging, and they can start thinking, well, it's not going to matter in the future if I bring up anything, because they're not going to hear that either.
The thing is, we have to be very careful to be an example of the response we want.
Yeah.
So if we want our spouse to listen and be a good listener, are we a good listener?
Yeah.
Are we hearing them out? So there's a lot of things that you have to look back on. You might want to go through a season of time of creating a safe environment, making yourself approachable, and making sure you're dealing with your spouse's issues before you start presenting yours.
A great scripture is Galatians 6 and verse 7. Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. This is telling us to watch how we are coming across to our spouse, that we're doing it in the same way that we want them to treat us.